panelists and our attendees, both in person with ESO and on Zoom. So my name is Keeley Bombard. I am the president of BU's Environmental Student Organization, and I'm going to be asking you the questions today. So I'm really excited to hear everything that everyone has to say. I'll be specifically asking the questions of our wonderful panelists. So we have Robert Tumpowsky from 350 Mass, which I'm very excited about. We also have Divya Nandan from Fridays for Future, which, as they talked about earlier, that's the group that's the big overarching sponsor, I guess, for the strike that we're all going to be at on Friday. And then we also have Loie Hayes from BCAN itself. So we're really excited to hear from you guys. And I know that we also have some BCAN members on the call that would probably also have some super interesting answers to these questions. So I figure I'll kick it off with the panelists, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I will address those as well. So we'll start off with some questions we have, and then as questions pile into the chat, I'll either incorporate them as we go or we can do them all at the end. So yeah, how does that sound? Any questions? Yeah. Okay, sounds good. So the first question for each of the panelists is to introduce yourself and sort of tell us about your background. We're curious about if your educational background is related to environmental topics, and how did you just originally get involved with all of this kind of work? So Divya, why don't we start with you?
Sure thing. Hi, I'm Divya. I use she, her pronouns. I am the general coordinator for the Massachusetts chapter of the Global Youth Climate Organization, Fridays for Future. We are a youth organization, so I don't have an educational background in environmental studies because I am still in high school. But next fall, I will be majoring in environmental studies at Brandeis, so that's super exciting. Thank you. My involvement with the environmental movement itself really started in 2019. I don't know if anybody remembers like the big 7,000 people. I think it was 7,000. There was like a huge big rally in, I think it was Copley Square in Boston in 2019. That was my first event ever. I knew where I stood on environmental issues prior to then, but I think that that was really the first time that I thought to get involved at more of an active level, I guess. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much, Divya. I'm so excited to see all the cool things that you do at Brandeis. How about we'll go for Loie next, just because you're closest on my screen.
Okay, sure. So I'm Loie Hayes. I'm a member of Boston Climate Action Network, and I was born in the 50s. And so before I became aware of environmental issues per se, I was exposed to the racial justice movement, civil rights movement, the feminist movement, and in 1973, the Arab oil embargo coincided with my planning what to do in college and brought to light the fundamental nature of the petroeconomy and the instability of the petroeconomy, and that we needed to find a renewable source of energy. So I ended up majoring in human ecology at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine. Very small school, and a very broad curriculum. Mostly I read literature and studied feminism, but understood ecology at the same time, and was exposed to concepts including global warming. At that point, we didn't even know, was global warming happening in the 70s, and it wasn't until really a decade or so later that we started to learn about climate change being real, and it wasn't until in the early 90s that I became involved with the climate movement, even and then I was even just peripherally. It wasn't until the 2000s really that um, uh, climate change became center to my politics.
That's really interesting you say that. I'm also curious. So were you in Boston that whole time that you started getting involved in the early 2000s, or were you kind of bouncing around?
Yeah, I was in Boston by that point, um, and had been involved with feminist anti-militarist organizing and the Rainbow Coalition, mayoral campaign for Mel King. There was a growing sense of intersectionality between the different progressive movements. But even at that point, um, environment was still seen as kind of white people, middle class people, primarily concerned about conservation of natural areas. Um, I mean, there definitely was an environmental uh, justice movement that was happening then, but I remember going to a um, kind of an early intersectional movement building um, day where we were trying to organize the peace movement and the various identity politics movements. And at that point, I was already engaged in climate work, and I was trying to argue, we can fight war after war. This was, I think, during the Iraq War, and we can fight war after war, but if we don't solve the climate crisis, then we have no planet on which to continue to fight for justice in any aspect. And so the existential nature of the climate crisis became clear to me that. So anyway, I was in Boston from the early 80s on.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. And then we'll pass it over to you, Robert, to talk about your background and how you got involved.
Hi, everybody. I came of age in the latter part of the 1960s and was very engaged with civil rights and particularly with anti-Vietnam War issues. And I sort of been a consistent theme in my life. I worked doing union work at General Electric for 5 years. And then since then, I was a regional coordinator for Deval Patrick for governor, for those of you who know who that was. It was a while ago, but he was our state's first Black governor and our first Democrat at that point in quite a while. And I spent years engaged with the parent movement in public school parent movement in Boston, a multiracial movement to work for better schools. And through some friends, who are both in BCAN and 350 Mass, we had a conversation about climate activism, which while I was in a generic way very supportive of, I didn't really know anything about it. And I said, okay, this seems like a good movement for me to engage with at this point. So that was about 7 years ago. I have no academic background in climate stuff at all, but I've tried to learn a lot over these past 7 years. Should I just leave it at that, or do you want me to deal with another question? Let's see.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
No, we'll leave it at that for now. Why don't we come back if there's more?
Yeah, that's perfect. I can actually start with you for this next one because I feel like you led up to it really well. I was going to ask, how long have you been involved in your respective organizations and how you specifically got involved in your organization? So you were saying, Robert, that it was about 7 years ago that you got involved, and was that immediately with 350 or BCAN, or maybe a combination?
350 immediately, and you can call me Bob.
Okay. Sounds good. So you were 350 immediately, and then was it like friends of yours that got you involved, or?
It was friends of mine, but I didn't know most of the other people in the organization, 2 old friends. But I took to it, and unfortunately the dynamic in volunteer organizations, if you're willing to show up and do some work, you get more of it. That seems to be how it goes. So now in 350 Mass, I'm the co-chair of our statewide legislative team. So we work on all the legislation at the State House with a decent amount of success, I would say.
Cool. Thank you so much. And then Divya, how about you? So you said that 2019 was when you first got involved with climate activism generally, but when did you get involved in Fridays for Future?
So the strike back in 2019 was actually Fridays for Future strike. So 2019 was really when I got involved in Fridays for Future, and that was because before then I was 13.
Fair enough.
But I mean, Fridays for Future has kind of been like my home, I guess, in terms of like organizations. It did kind of have a little bit of a fall through at like the start of the pandemic. There were some structural changes, some disagreements, and it sort of broke off from the Fridays for Future label. I since then took it upon myself to bring it back because what Fridays for Future had become, even though it had some amazing activists in it, was a little bit inactive. So I tried to revive that one first, and then that was unsuccessful. So I went back to Fridays for Future and I restarted the Massachusetts branch, and we've been trucking on ever since. And that would have been in, I think, March of 2020.
Good for you that during all of that, you were like, you know what, I'm going to lead this and just bring it back. That's amazing. And then Loie, how about you? How long have you been involved in BCAN?
Let's see. Since the early 2000s, Hurricane Katrina was in 2005, and I remember at that point, BCAN had started around 2000, but by 2005, a lot of people had burned out, and it was basically just a listserv, for people to commiserate, share articles, etc. But by 2005, with Katrina happening, we started to have, okay, there's enough energy. We want to start showing up and petitioning and meeting in public and stuff. So that's when I actually quit my day job and started working full time in the climate movement at that point.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm just curious if I can ask you one more thing about that. Like, what was your decision-making process like at that time, like when you decided to really go full-time towards these issues? Was it a difficult decision, or did it feel like, no, this is just so easy, I just want to do this?
It was complex. I had been in publishing. Go on to another person for a second. I've got a throat problem.
Sounds good. The next question was going to be about sort of like how the environmental movement has changed or stayed the same during your time in it. And I know that, there's been a lot of big changes, like Divya, you were alluding to after the pandemic. There's been a lot of changes and shaking up of the environmental movement recently. And I'm curious to hear about either just what you see happening in your organization. Yeah, what's changed, what stays the same, sort of what do you think still has to change? So there's a lot there. But I wanted to start with you on this one, Divya, just because I know that you alluded to like different disagreements, and I wondered if it had to do with those kinds of shakeups happening during that time.
Those specific disagreements didn't really. I think it was kind of just deciding in which direction to take the organization. Although I will say the pandemic did bring about a lot of change. I know that there was a lot of burnout. I was burnt out. Everybody I was working with was burnt out. And it was kind of a little bit difficult to adjust, all of these in-person events that we would normally be having that we now can't have, and trying to find online alternatives to all of them. I remember for Earth Day of 2020, I believe, don't quote me on that date, Fridays for Future USA did actually with Climate Strike NYC, I think, we did it was a virtual rally, and a bunch of like organizations had it was like this program called Gather Town, and you could make your little avatar and have your avatar walk around this little virtual world, and all these organizations would have these virtual booths set up that you would go to and talk to little Zoom screens of a person, and they would talk to you about the organization, and it was so cool. But it was a little bit different because we had to sort of come up with like really creative like solutions to have those events take place. So that was one thing. And then I would also definitely say that I've only been in the climate movement for a couple of years. So my two fellow panelists can probably give a little bit of a deeper response to this question, but I have seen a lot of a shift more towards, you know, social justice within the climate movement. And I think that that's fantastic. I think that people are beginning to become a little bit more aware of that. And, you know, the climate crisis will affect everyone, but it won't affect everyone equally. And so I do think that it's great that we're beginning to get a little bit more aware of that. I think that we still have a long way to go in terms of understanding, you know, who is the most affected and how so, and what can we do with those people to, I guess, even the playing field a little bit. So yeah.
Absolutely. I'm seeing some claps in the some Zoom reactions of claps. I have to agree. That was amazing. No, and I think it's really interesting when you joined it, like, because I know you haven't been involved for your entire life, you know what I mean? But you joined at a very pivotal moment, you know? So I feel like people that, I mean, we're pretty close in age, but I'm probably like 4 or 5 years older than you maybe. And so like, I feel like even that difference in age, you first got into things when people were already from the start thinking about these things. But I feel like even myself starting out like 4 or 5 years ago, there were even back then people that weren't thinking as much about the intersectionality of the climate movement as we are today. So I feel like that's really exciting. And there's a lot of very cool opportunities in that. So thank you. How about you, Robert? Do you have anything to say about sort of how it's changed or stayed the same throughout your time?
Yeah, I think we always had somewhat of a climate justice focus, but it got much more developed in the last few years. And we've also had relationships with organizations that are led by people of color for a while, Alternatives for Community and Environment in Roxbury, and NACOB, which is the indigenous organization in Jamaica Plain. But we still remain a heavily white group, unfortunately, but that's another discussion. And I think I've noticed it in our legislative work, particularly, like everything we do, we put a climate justice lens on it as part of the bills that we introduce and support. So that has changed. That was not the case when I first joined. And we've moved pretty far in that direction. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, no, it's very cool to see that it's been such a big shift in such a short time. Yeah, and it's great that you're saying that now there's a focus with everything that you guys do on leading first with climate justice. And I'm curious sort of what kinds of things your organization does to try and do that. I know that BCAN, I've had a conversation with Sophie about this in the past, about BCAN itself being a predominantly white organization and trying to balance that and trying to find like what your voice should be as an organization in the movement in this area. So I'm curious like what the conversation is around that. That could be a question both for you, Bob, and also for Loie about BCAN as well, but I'll pass it to you first, Bob.
Okay. Our primary focus has been on building alliances with existing organizations of people of color rather than recruitment. Not that we wouldn't like to do that, but I think historically, generally, if organizations start out white, they tend to stay mostly white. And we want to make sure that we're engaging with climate justice activists in whatever way makes the most sense right now. So that's what we're doing for now. And we're also involved in some coalitions. One is the MARA Coalition, which stands for Mass Renews, and that is a mixture of traditional climate activists, climate justice and environmental justice activists, labor people. You know, it's got a whole range in that coalition. So that's a significant part of our coalition work.
No, that's really cool to hear that you're like partnering strategically with other groups to try and address that in your organization. I'll pass it to you now, Loie, about sort of what's changed, what stayed the same, and then also just that conversation about BCAN finding their place in this movement right now.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really different. Well, there are a few things that are that have really changed in the climate movement. First, if you think back to 2005 when I was getting involved, we really were still struggling with getting the science, the basic science understood, and getting a kind of a popular agreement that that climate change was happening and the humans were responsible. So robust science is something that is now much more widespread, and that's hugely significant because you can't organize a movement unless people understand what the issue is. Um, and g- Concomitant with that is the common experience of climate change impacts that more and more people are able to identify. You know, I had to move from Honduras to the United States because of the torrential um, rains and mudslides that are happening, and they had never happened in generations of my family before, but we can no longer live in where we were living, or the mountains of Peru, et cetera, et cetera. So people are experiencing in their lives, in their family lives, the impacts of climate change, and that brings a kind of a gut level understanding of the issues, in addition to the science level of understanding. um, and then the other thing that's so different is, of course, the sophistication of our strategic thinking, that intersectionality is no longer like this fringe issue coming out of second wave, third wave feminism, but is now understood in a much broader swath of organizing circles, and people are better prepared to act in an intersectional way. And that's really different from, say, 2005, when there was still um, uh, uh, kind of a scratching of heads around intersectionality for a lot of people, I think. So those are all really changed, are all really different, and make our movement much better poised to um, you know, enact change and um, take advantage of people's empowerment, um, and for Fridays for the future, for youth to be able to lead because they are recognized as all the knowledge that they hold from their own experiences, from their understanding of science. And I guess the other big thing is the access to the internet. That in 2005 we were still um, we certainly had internet, but there wasn't the fluency that there is now, and the breadth of resources that people are able to tap into now. And certainly with the pandemic, we've all totally had to rely on the internet. So that's huge too. For Divya to be able to um, recreate and make an organization flourish even in the middle of the pandemic. So that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I also would add on to, so I've already asked Bob about it a little bit, but I'm curious to hear what Loie has to say specifically about BCAN and what Divya had to say about Fridays for Future, about sort of during this period of intense change in the environmental movement. How has your organization adapted to that to be specific about incorporating more of an environmental justice focus? And Bob mentioned the coalitions and things like that 350 is a part of. And I'm curious if BCAN or Fridays for Future do something similar.
Coalition. I'll take a first stab if you don't mind, Divya. I mean, Boston Climate Action Network has network in our name, and that's been our foundation is recognizing that if we're going to affect a policy change in the city of Boston, it's inadequate to just organize in Jamaica Plain, which has been kind of our home community for forever. If we only have District 6 city councilor pushing for a measure, it's going to be very difficult for that person to win over the full city council, let alone the mayor. So networking with other groups has been really important to us from the get-go, and it's been a challenge for us from the get-go because our history is coming out of the white liberal middle class um, culture, um, and um, we've we've pushed to one of the things that we've pushed ourselves to do from the get-go is to um, translate climate issues into um, the day-to-day issues that people are facing. For instance, immigration and climate issues in the Caribbean and Latin America. You know, we've done theater productions focused on that, and uh, you know, so uh, the networking, the translating of issues into common speak, and not relying on kind of the cultural tropes of the white liberal middle class as much as we can. You know, obviously there are limitations still.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how about you and Fridays for Future, Divya?
So, about coalitions, we are part of a coalition. It's a fantastic one. It's called the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition, MIC for short. It is lovely. It's mostly youth organizations, some adult leaders. So it's a really good space for youth to be able to share ideas and opinions, and also for adults and youth to sort of work together. So that's awesome. And they've been so huge in helping us with events and stuff. In terms of incorporating environmental justice into our work, I think, I'm very sorry, let me mute my phone. I think something we're always aware of and always encourage our members to be aware of is, again, the fact that there are frontline communities that are being affected by the climate crisis right now, and very harshly. So I know that that's something that we incorporate into our Fridays for Future USA has that incorporated into its general list of demands. And also on September 24th of 2021, we had a strike that's whole like tagline was uproot the system. And the whole, I guess, point of that strike was to show that there are people that are being affected by the climate crisis right now. And those are, for the most part, communities of color, communities that are lower income, communities that don't maybe have the same systemic privileges as white middle class communities. So I know that we had 5 speakers that were from frontline communities and had firsthand experience with the climate crisis. So being able to, shed some light on what they've gone through and their stories was so important to us. And then also, of course, just having regular talks with the members in the organization to really understand who is being affected by the climate crisis, not just who will be affected by the climate crisis. And I think that especially as a youth organization, our narrative a lot of the times is like, this is our future, we're going to be affected by this. And while that is true, I think that sometimes it can make it seem like it's not a problem right now, which is not true at all, because of course it is. And so I think that that's something that we sort of, especially as a youth organization, kind of have to keep drilling into our heads. And that's work, but it's what you need to do.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I definitely think that I resonate with that with ESO, definitely talking a lot about the future impacts and not necessarily focusing as much on what's happening for people right now, because you're trying to mobilize a group that has this shared experience that might be different than those who are being affected by the climate crisis right now. So it's definitely, you're absolutely right that it's work that you have to constantly be doing, especially in a youth organization with that kind of mission. Okay, the next question that I have for you guys is a little bit more of a sort of like retrospective question. So I'm curious about what your favorite memory or most impactful memory has been in your work so far. This could be an event that was planned. This could be maybe a success that your group had. And I'm curious to hear when you look back on your time working on these issues thus far, what sticks out to you? So Bob, how about we start with you? Oh, I'm sorry, I think you're muted.
I didn't remember muting. We had a forum a few years back, and we invited a legislator who was the head of the Ways and Means Committee in the House. And they agreed to come, and it was right before the end of the legislative session. And he didn't show. He sent some aide who felt sorry for getting pounced on. And we talked to a lot of people about it, and he lost his election to Nika Ellegardo, who's a totally progressive legislator, by about 300 votes. So I'm hoping all the people that were at that forum and all the people they talked to might have been enough to pull it over the finish line. It's a little hard to know, but that was great. Another one was not specifically a climate, but it's very memorable to me. We were sitting out in our backyard with a couple friends who are also in 350 Mass, and we heard honking. And that was in 2020 when Trump got beat. That was a great moment.
Wow.
And other than that, let's see, well, the passing of the roadmap bill in the previous legislative session was a tremendous victory for all of us.
That is so exciting to have been like directly involved with your group's advocacy, directly affecting who is in power and making decisions. That's really great.
Did our best.
How about you, Loie?
Yeah, one thing that was particularly moving was the launch of the Green Justice Coalition. For years, Boston Climate Action Network had been collaborating with an organization called Acorn in Dorchester to lead energy saving workshops. And this was primarily older African Americans who would come to these workshops who wanted to know, how can I reduce my electric bill and my heating costs? And we'd been doing those for years. And Acorn was part of a community labor coalition, an organization, Community Labor United, was linking social justice groups that were not labor organized, they were labor focused, with labor unions. So that organization, that coalition had been happening for years. And because Acorn was collaborating in both of these directions, with environmentalists through our energy saving workshops and with Community Labor United on the other campaigns, there was an opportunity to create a three-legged stool that linked environmental issues, social justice organizations, economic justice organizations, and labor organizations. And we launched the Green Justice Coalition, and I'm guessing it was around 2010. And we had a kickoff event at the 12th Baptist Church in Roxbury. And it was so moving to hear representatives from each of those three sectors recognizing the power of each of the other sectors and the importance of forming a green coalition. It was a very moving event.
Up was to thank Loie for the wonderful memory that she shared, and then to ask Divya for hers.
Absolutely.
Welcome back.
I had a whole script in my head.
Yeah.
The one that comes to mind is the rally that we just did on September, well, not just did, it was a couple months ago now, but it was the September 24th one. And I think that was so special to us because we were still a developing and also restarting organization. And I think it sort of felt for Massachusetts like all the other local groups, because they had been working since, before we've even been a thing, that they were like ready to go, and they were like ready to pull off these amazing events. And that was so exciting to us, but it also kind of felt a little nerve-wracking because we felt like, anybody in Massachusetts who wanted to go to an event, we kind of had to measure up for them. So it was a little bit scary, but we managed to pull it off, and it was amazing. And we had some incredible speakers. We got some great press. We got, I think, a letter from Ed Markey, which was awesome. Well, his office, but which was really awesome. And, comparatively, it's not the biggest event that I've ever been to, but it was still so special because it was something that we sort of pulled together with not as many resources. So that was, and we, I think, managed to get the message of the strike across as well as we could, which was really awesome. And I believe, and I would have to double check where exactly it's being introduced, but one of the bills off of our list of demands was moving forward to be passed, which is really exciting, and
So exciting.
we'll have to stay updated on that. So
Yes, absolutely. Congrats. That's so exciting.
thank you.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much for sharing those really exciting memories. It makes me very optimistic for things like that to happen in the future. And I figured that what I would do now is pass it on to any audience questions. I'm going to ask the in-person ESO folks here real quick if there's any questions there, and then I'll pass it on to the Zoom people. So, any questions over here? I want to make sure that I don't, like, you know what I mean? Okay. How about you guys on Zoom? And, no worries. You can still interrupt me at any time and just poke me and tell me you have a question. Judy, do you have a question? Oh, I think you might be muted.
Unmute.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. Hi.
Hi.
I think your questions have been absolutely provocative and so great.
Judy?
I just hearing from the three of you has been so interesting. The whole business. I'm thinking. I guess my question is, what do you do when you have despair? I'm very curious about how people cope with things, particularly people from different generations than me. I also I was born in 1945. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I thought the world was falling apart back in the 60s, but that's nothing compared to this thing. How do you cope? What do you tend to do to help yourself through the depression times or the pessimistic times?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question for both for Divya, who's starting out, and then also for people who've been in the movement for a little bit longer. It's Divya, you were mentioning burnout and fatigue. It's easy to deal with that, and it's also easy to deal with climate pessimism sometimes when you're focused on these issues for a long time. So if any of you want to take that one first, feel free.
I can take it.
Okay, go ahead.
So this is an issue that I am all too familiar with. Honestly, a lot of my time in the climate movement has been spent being burnt out. Actually, the reason I decided to get involved in climate activism in the first place is because I am of Indian descent, and most of my family lives in India, and the situation there is a mess. I know, I have families whose farms have been uprooted, our forests have been cut down, the ones that we consider holy. Our lakes have been filled up. The air, my grandmother lives in India. She's asthmatic because of how polluted the air is. And so I know for me personally, I'm kind of constantly surrounded by how bad the climate situation can be in parts of the world. So I think that, I know that I am very prone to burnout. I know that a lot of activists are very prone to burnout. And the best, I guess, advice I can give is to take breaks when you need them. The climate movement is insanely important, but you're not going to be able to do anything for it if you're not, taking care of yourself first. So whenever I need a break, I take a break, and then it's sometimes a little bit hard to get back, but I think once you do, it's, once you hit your stride, you're golden. So taking breaks is the best thing that I can suggest to cope with burnout.
That's great. How about you, Bob? I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, there's a few things that I find that help, but I'm sympathetic to the underlying problem, rest assured. One for me is like going to big demonstrations or rallies and seeing people I know and feeling the energy of the crowd. I had 2 of those this past week, and I was feeling a little burned out earlier in the week, and now I don't feel that way anymore. So that's good. And self-care, is important. get outside, enjoy the world, connect with your friends, your relatives, whoever you got to connect with. It doesn't work to become a maniacal climate activist. That's unsustainable. Either you will sink into despair or you'll become so rigid that you'll be of no value to anyone. So
Yeah.
that's my suggestion.
No, that's a great idea. I totally resonate with that, with just being energized, just being around people, specifically like being around you guys right now makes me feel better about this whole thing that we're dedicating our time to. Because there's other people who are doing the same. So that helps me too. How about you, Loie?
I definitely am prone to despair. But for me, in a sense, I feel like there is no going back from being a climate activist. You can't unknow what you know. And it's, I think there is a solace in community. And so going to the demonstrations and feeling this is my church, this is my congregation, this is my holy place when we come together in the streets to show this is what democracy looks like, and to feel the power and the agency that we can create when we are together. So that is a core practice that helps sustain me. I mean, I feel like this is a lifetime. As long as I'm alive, in order to love myself, I have to be true to what I know and true to the values that I share with other movement activists. And of course, finding pleasure, finding the parties around a fire under the stars, and the joy in seeing a stream on the mountainside, etc. Those are essential too, because otherwise you lose your sense of awe, your sense of perspective, that your panic, your personal burnout is only one small part of the world, and that the world is a beautiful place that that we can contribute to, and we can act in a way of integrity. But we don't have to take it all on ourselves. There is a church, a congregation of the people, and there is a holiness in the world that reverberates through us and lifts us up through those difficult times of depression and just hard to see the world in such pain.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, Loie. I want to also highlight something that Tom put in the chat that I think is also really helpful, that relates to what you were saying, that you introduce BCAN members to a story process, the story of me, the story of us, the story of now, learning about each other and figuring out how to stay connected. And I think that's kind of the essence of what all of you were talking about, that staying connected both to yourself and also to others as we do this work and hold these things important, and understanding that there are other people out there that think they're important too. So it's not all on you, it's on us together, and we're there. So I'm gonna pass it over to Hailey now.
Well, I am raising my hand not because we have to be done with questions and I'm going to wrap up, but because I have a question for BU ESO. Putting you all on the spot, because I'm so curious, thank you, first of all, so graciously for you as an organization, hosting this event. But I'm curious if you, Keeley, yourself, or if somebody else is there, I know you're kind of in a room, so maybe it's kind of hard to have everyone speak, but if somebody would like to share, like, what brings you to BU ESO and like what inspires your organization, and kind of what's been the core of how you all, and I know Amy, you're also a part of BU ESO, if you want to share. Well, yeah, which has kind of been motivating your organization, and what has been a particular focus for you all, especially while studying in a pandemic as well, and how that's impacted your organization work as a student group on campus. Kind of a loaded question, but feel free to just share anything you want about BU ESO.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Hailey. I'll say something quick, but then I'll pass it over to you guys. I think just throughout my whole college experience, both I'm a senior, so half of it was pre-pandemic, half of it was post-pandemic. And throughout all of it, ESO has been a really great way for me to do what we were just talking about, connect with other people who care about the same things as I do. When we're advertising ESO, we always just say like we're a group of people who come together every week and learn something new. So we show up, we pick a topic, we watch something, we listen to someone else who knows something more than we do, and we just learn new things about the environment. We learn new things about, you know, ourselves and each other and what we find important. And we also just find community here on campus, which definitely has gotten harder since COVID has happened. But I will say we were able to do some fun virtual events as well. And as soon as things started opening up, we've been doing more walks and trying to do more volunteering and things like that. And then also just reaching out more into Boston, like groups like BCAN. But yeah, that's what I would say about ESO. I don't know. Anyone else have anything they want to say? I don't want to like.
I think
Go ahead, Sarah.
that was really a great way to sum up.
Wow.
Oh, I don't know if you can hear. You want to come over?
yeah. We have like our little like pitch that we have whenever we have like club fairs and we're trying to get people to join ESO. We always kind of like yell at all the people at the fair. We're like, do you like the earth? Like, if you like the earth, get over here. So just to kind of give you an idea of like the types of people we have, it's really like we're from all different majors and backgrounds, but like at the end of the day, like we all love the earth. So it's really just a great space to kind of learn together and just kind of figure out how we can influence what's going on for the better.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else have anything else they want to say? Don't want to cut anyone off.
Hey.
I think that's that's BUESO. Welcome here. Yeah, and then I don't know if Hailey is the one who wants to close us out, but I did want to say just thank you guys so much for answering my questions, and I really appreciated listening and hearing from all of you. And I hope to see you guys again on Friday at the climate strike in Boston.
Yes, sir.
Common, 3 to
Great
5
job
p.m.
of moderating. Great job of moderating, Keeley.
Thanks, Judy. 3 to 5 p.m. Boston Common. Be there, be square. I'm very excited. Anything else before we head out, Hailey? I think that might be it.
Yes, just quick announcements again. Thank you. Excuse me, ignore my congestion. Thank you so much, Keeley, for hosting this event. Thank you to all of our amazing panelists and all of the work that you do. So excited to have all of your organizations represented at the Friday event. Again, yes, we're meeting at the Boston Commons at 3 at the part of the Commons where it kind of like is up by the State House. We'll be doing we'll have some amazing speeches by Keeley as well, included amongst those speakers. And we'll also have some great chants and actions at a table. I just want to quickly say that we also have another event. I know that Sophie addressed it in the beginning, but just to pub it again, we have another event happening this Wednesday with the amazing Judith Foster and the amazing Lokita Jackson. They both are part of the Hero Nurturing Center and Crane Ledge Woods Coalition, respectively. And it's going to be a great conversation about who has access to the outdoors, historic injustice, and how that impacts the relationship of BIPOC people to the outdoors. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation. You should definitely stick around 6:30 to 7:30 on Wednesday. Go to our Facebook event for the climate strike. That's where all those Zoom registrations are for these events. And yes, again, also please attend the event on Friday. We'd really love to have you there, rain or shine. So yes, thank you all so much. I'm just going to. Oh, yes.
Hailey and Autumn, thank you for all your planning and all this fruition.
No worries. Thank you
Of
for
course.
coming.
Yes. Well, it's only because all of you and your enthusiasm helped mobilize everything so fast. So thank you. I'm just going to quickly put in the chat. Divya mentioned about NYCC. I do have their policy platform from another NYCC coalition member. And so if you want to check out more of what they do and their current policy platform, hope that's okay, Divya. I'm listing it here in the chat. So that's there for you. Our 2 asks for this week for the climate strike with Fridays for Future Mass is kind of under the auspice of the People Not Profit theme this year, and talking about how we want to give power and justice back to people, particularly people that have been historically marginalized and need climate reparations, and a lot of the theme we've been talking about. Our two main asks this for this event is both at the state and then the local level here in Boston. So building on our Fix the Grid movement and building on Governor Baker asking ISO New England to stop building barriers for having a just renewable energy transition and bringing more renewable energy into this state, as well as having a line item in the City Council of Boston's budget for green space infrastructure acquisition, starting with the Crane Ledge Woods Forest, which is an amazing area. And there's going to be a rally for that as well at Crane Ledge Woods Saturday from 1 to 2 p.m. At the Walgreens on American Legion Highway. So anyways, that was a lot of announcements. Like I said, just go to our Facebook event. All the details are there. Thank you again, everyone. Stay safe, stay well this week. Hopefully we'll see you at any of the events we have going on. And hopefully I'll be well enough, so we'll be good. But
See you guys
thank
then.
you,
Thank you all so much.
Bye, you all.
Bye now.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Have a great night. Thank you, Divya. Thank you, Bob, for being here. Thank you, Loie, for your time as well. Really, really appreciate all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank
I'm gonna
you.
stop the recording.